Good morning, Nigeria, and good day to you wherever you are in the world, and welcome to the 26th session of the Nigeria Economic Summit, titled Building Partnerships for Resilience. We are in the 21st century. We know that knowledge capital is the most important capital that there is. We also know that knowledge assets have been able to create perhaps the biggest companies in the world, and the biggest organizations, and perhaps the biggest events and innovations that are tipping the direction in which the entire world is going. So we want to explore to what extent Nigeria is ready for that 21st century. What are we doing in terms of research and development? We've assembled a stellar team of CEOs to the roundtable who cover a broad range of sectors, very critical to Nigeria's industrialization, Nigeria's economic development. And from them today, we're going to tap into their insights, we're going to tap into their experience, and we're going to ask them to actually help us to architect the future for Nigeria. We're going to talk to them about building partnerships and what the partnerships can do to activate research and development, who they need to be talking to, what stakeholders need to be at the table, what incentives need to be put in place. But most importantly, we want to learn directly from the experience of what has been successful, what has worked, and what may not have worked. And from all that, we will derive a way forward, a pathway for Nigeria to accelerate its development and its role and its positioning within the global context of development. So welcome with me the following key speakers, CEOs, beginning with Ms. Nair Emiko, who is the CEO of Kian Smith Refinery. Mr. Ed Ubong, who is the CEO of Shell Nigeria Gas. Mr. Chika Ikenga, who is the CEO of Unicell Limited. And Mr. Kunle Oyelano, who is the CEO of GlaxoSmithKline, GSK. Thank you for joining us. And are we all on screen? Okay. Hi, Nair, can see you. Good morning.
Good morning.
Welcome to CEO's Roundtable.
Thank you.
Okay, maybe we start with you. Could you give us a brief description of your own background, what your company does, and perhaps and also your perspectives on investing in R&D in Nigeria?
So my background is electrical and computer engineering. Before I switched into mining, the mining sector, I used to design chips. And it's interesting, I was thinking about this topic, and my background there was really R&D. My last project was designing I used to work for Frisco Motorola. We were designing the last chip for Apple. We were dealing with concepts of multi-threading, multi-chip before it became mainstream. So it's interesting that now I'm in the mining sector, and I never really thought about it until this session, realizing that even exploration of minerals is very R&D. And so all we've done thus far to reach this point of deciding to refine and all these things came from R&D. Our work is R&D, like it or not, and we've just had to find creative, innovative ways to make money, and as we're doing R&D, funding our R&D as we build our business. So I think that's what I'll say for now.
That's absolutely amazing. So you've been into one of those places where they have lab coats and they don't allow anyone to step in on it if you have like loose hair or anything of the sort. Microns of dust are enough to shut down the factories. So we're going to come back to that because that's an interesting thing, because the question would be, do we have the capacity to build those kind of facilities? And just hold the thought, and I'll come back to you as we get into the discussion. Okay. Mr. Are you there? Mr. Ubong, Shell Nigeria?
Hello, can you hear me? Chika, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
We can hear you very well.
Yeah, sorry about that. We would need to battle the link a little bit. But my name is Ed Ubong. I'm an electronics engineer by background, just like Nere. Spent a huge time working behind the scenes on microprocessor and computing technologies in my undergraduate days. But I've sort of moved into the oil and gas industry for the past 20 years plus. Today, I sort of work as managing director for Shell Nigeria Gas. We sort of provide energy for most of the manufacturing companies in Nigeria. I can see Kunle there. He's one of my customers. We get gas to the GSK factories in Barauta area. And I think for us, I think for Shell, R&D plays a key role that would enable us go through the energy transition. And I think this is important because when you talk about cutting edge, when you are talking of big transitions, a key sector that sort of makes that switch to become possible is the R&D sector. And at the group level, we're very committed to continuing to sort of carry out R&D, investing significant sums of money to sort of drive that. I think it's also worth mentioning before we sort of go into the details that in reality, the cradle of R&D is the education sector. If your educational sector is not working, then you really don't have the sort of base or foundation to begin to drive R&D that would sort of lead to cutting edge technology. Thank you.
Straight in the deep end of the pool, and we're going to have to go and discuss that a little bit in more detail. Education as one of the most important and the most critical elements of an R&D capability within the country. So you mentioned Kunle, so let's go to him as your customer. And Kunle is the CEO of GlaxoSmithKline, GSK. Kunle, can you give us your perspective, a little bit of your background and perspective?
Well, morning, everyone, and congratulations on the summit. And thanks, Chineye. My name is Kunle Oyilano. My background is in healthcare. I trained initially as a pharmacist. I've had the opportunity to work across Asia, Africa, and of course, Nigeria. I'm the group managing director for GlaxoSmithKline in Nigeria. And we are, for people that know, we are a leading healthcare company in Nigeria, and we have footprint across manufacturing, consumer healthcare, and of course, pharmaceuticals. And to the point that's been made, really, I think the theme for this year's summit is particularly apt, looking at building partnerships for residents. And there are a lot of learnings that we all can take on how partnerships can accelerate development in R&D. And if you look at our country, if you look at Nigeria, look at the scale of the development needs that we have, if you look at the future that we want, and look at the speed at which we need to achieve some of these things, invariably, partnerships really will be a key component of that acceleration. And I'm looking forward to sharing thoughts with other colleagues here on this line.
Fantastic. And you've talked about pace, you've talked about scale and local and challenges, meeting up with challenges. I'm sure we're going to circle back to that. But let me bring on Chika Ikenga, who's the CEO of Unicell, to share his thoughts before we dive straight into these huge issues that you guys have brought up already.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Chika Ikenga. I'm the managing director of Unicell. I'm also the managing director of Recare Cosmetics. Recare is really what I'm quite interested about because I created a brand called Nature's Gentle Touch. My background is industrial chemistry. I studied industrial chemistry at the University of Nigeria. In 1997, when we started Nature's Gentle Touch, the hair care brand, we were competing with big imported brands for the lady in the house. I mean, we'll be talking about Dark and Lovely. Then we'll be talking about Revlon. I mean, these are pretty big brands coming out of the US. The interesting thing is that it was research and development that really set us up, that helped us to compete, to be able to get our products on the shelves. It was R&D that helped us to differentiate our products. I believe if I didn't study industrial chemistry, I wouldn't have had the basis to have been able to provide solutions for Nigerian women living in Nigeria. When I go into supermarkets, particularly these days, what I do find is that more than 95% of the products on the shelves, now I'm talking about FMCG, are imported. And all I just see are opportunities for local manufacturing and the role that research and development plays, to help uplift our society, to help industrialize our society. I see R&D as a platform to create jobs. With what is happening in Chineye's world, the fourth industrial revolution, I can see opportunities where we can use R&D, to scale up, to speed up our process of improving the lives of our people. But what I find a bit frustrating sometimes, the current collaborations between the private sector and the research institutes. When we go to some of these research institutes, there's an attitude of they really do not care. For the universities, they kind of, when you want to collaborate with them, they see around, they want to present R&D to you or the collaboration as a corporate social responsibility. So if you're providing funding, just provide the fund and just go away, but there's no accountability. But I'm hoping that at the end of this session, we'll be able to articulate some of the things that can help us use R&D to move the country forward. Thank you.
Fantastic. So I was just reflecting on, when I was looking at the CEO roundtable, I was just reflecting on the attitude that we have. We have two, if we like, homegrown local players, in the sense that you're working on businesses that are Nigerian businesses, and then we've got two individuals working at the global level, with organizations that are global brands and very well known for heavy investments in research and development. And so between the two groups, even though we're all on the same side, the key question that comes up, which I'd like for you to kind of like jump into now, is let's discuss a little bit and share with the audience what we consider to be the core drivers in a globalized environment for evolving local research and development. What are the 1, 2, 3, maybe 4 things that are essential, that must exist in an environment for you, for the country or for that nation to push R&D and link R&D directly to economic development? Mira, do you want to start? You come from a background of production of actually design and production, R&D in technology, and you've gone into a local organization that's refinery. What are your thoughts? What do you see as a difference between the two? And can you extract 1 or 2 of those drivers for us to pick up from?
I remember, well, someone was saying education, so I'll leave him to say that core one, and let me focus on the one that affects me here. A core driver here for us has been the market. The market and the problem. In our case, there was a big problem that had to be solved in our sector, which was funding. We couldn't get funding into the mining sector. But I'm looking at what I'm seeing, like, okay, there's gold here. We can't get funding. Why can't we get funding? The data. So I would say, for me, it was having the mind to see a problem, see an opportunity, and see a market. So I find that for us, especially in Nigeria, if people will see opportunity, they will find a reason to solve the problem. So for us, a big one was the problem, the market, and the opportunity.
So let me go in a little bit on that. When you say seeing the problem, the market, and the opportunity, many people, refer to Nigeria as a land of huge opportunity and also as a frontier market in many ways. So it would seem that the market opportunities are actually out there, but we don't seem to be linking that directly to research and development activity. we seem to be at the tail end of the value chain. What is preventing us from going to, moving a little bit upstream to start to develop research and development that actually solves those challenges that are local?
So if I look at my sector, like I said, data was missing. And you see, I realized one of the reasons why the mining sector hasn't fully developed is this R&D issue. It's heavily capital intensive. It's really technical. It requires investment, consistent investment, and policy, looking at how to get the data. And so what I realized is we're going to have to use the data we already have. And the data we had were the artisanal miners, the informal miners, the pathfinders. So I had to use the data they had. Where are they mining? How deep are they mining? And map out their work. So for me, it was now using who are the people doing the art, who are the people doing the work, and using their data points towards the information, using the market points towards the information. So I think for my sector, the opportunity really just requires somebody willing to look at the data. I would say there's always data out there, just the signal and the noise. So that's what we did. Now, the problem with Nigeria as well is patient capital. You can't do R&D without patient capital. It makes sense. We're a survival nation. Everyone is looking for money to meet the next needs, but R&D is very long-term. R&D is something you do that's patient, is long-term. As you find an issue, you fix it. And the thing about being a scientist, like, an engineer, I think we're a very science tech group here. In some time, in trying to solve one problem, you solve another problem. So one thing I'll give an example that's key for me is in trying to solve the mining funding issue, we stumbled upon, should I say, financial issues. We stumbled upon tech, using technology to solve formalization. Also realizing that financial inclusion is part of the problem. And we stumbled upon solutions for financial inclusion. We stumbled upon all kinds of other opportunity just because we did the work. So I really understand why the gap is there, especially for our sector. But I realize that at the same time, even without too much funding, a lot is already available. So it doesn't really need that much patient capital to look at the data that's there informally, even in our sector, to build it up. So yes, R&D is capital intensive, but I've just found, like I said, if we are willing to look at what's presently there, I do think that there's ways forward, just from the perspective of the Nigerian instinct of markets. Where's the money? How can I make money? There's a lot of data that's there that could be reviewed.
And great points that you've made. First of all, you're asking questions. I mean, you're following a scientific process. You're seeing an opportunity, you're questioning that opportunity, you're studying the data, then you're formulating an answer, and then you're testing that answer by going into the market, into actual research and development. And at the same time, you're realizing that the challenges that are coming up, and you're solving those as you go along. But you mentioned something that I want to pass on to Kunle, which is that it takes time. Research and development doesn't happen overnight. Kunle works in an industry primarily, and in an organization that has been in Nigeria for 50 plus years. This is where the bulk of Nigeria's revenue has come for over 50 years, going on 60 years. How much R&D is happening that is local? Kunle, if I may swing this to Kunle and ask the question, I'm not Kunle, Ed, and ask Ed the question, how much R&D, I mean, you've listened to what Nair has said, and I know that in your organization, you must be doing extensive research and development. Same thing with Kunle in GSK. So what is it about the globals and about extensive this duration? If you have decades of experience working in markets like Nigeria, putting products out there, what is it that is preventing, or is there really a challenge in terms of local R&D? I think maybe you need to come in first of all and tell us, do you see a challenge in terms of local R&D? What's the components of local R&D that actually goes into the production of the goods and the services that you provide?
Thank you, Chika. Maybe let me go first before Kunle. Is that okay?
Okay, that's great.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
That's fantastic. You're probably older in Nigeria, plus years, have you?
Well, I'm not sure yet, but I think it's just what sort of mentioning that R&D requires energy, and I mean, and I use the word energy there to represent different facets, but I'll just talk about two. The first part of energy required in R&D is mental. It requires significant mental energy, and that's why you sort of heard me talk about the cradle being education, right? If you don't get that right locally or globally, you don't have the resource pool to be able to make any significant inroads around R&D. The second bit is around something that is very dear to everyone in country, and that's around electrical energy, which everybody calls power. You do require significant amount of that for whatever facet of R&D you want to do, whether you're in the lab, whether you're in the sort of school setting, whether you're in the manufacturing sector. You do require reliable forms of power supply and energy to be able to put in the required grit that will sort of get the answers that are required to sort of move your product forward. There is a third angle, and I think Chika mentioned it earlier on. It's around the fact that R&D requires local partnerships. Without the local partnerships, then you may not end up with products that are relevant to the particular environment that you are in. You could very easily be doing research for the sake of research, rather than research to solve teething problems that exist in the society. For us at Shell, I mean, we've sort of approached this in different ways. The educational sector, we've sort of tried to set up strong partnerships with educational institutes in Nigeria. We set up centers of excellence. We've set up professorial chairs. We've also tried to sort of build the sort of grassroots knowledge required. And there, our approach has been supporting a significant scholarship scheme that sort of moves people from the secondary school to the universities, and also for postgraduate studies. I mean, if I look back over the past 10 years, we've possibly granted over 15,000 grants and spent over possibly $8 or $10 million over that period. Globally, we invest close to $1 billion on R&D, and for the next sort of few years, we are committed to push about $2 billion to see how we can sort of move along with the energy transition, which is basically just to develop new energy solutions that are cleaner and fit the new outlook. So yes, we do take R&D seriously, and our approach is still the same. Educate, educate, educate. Partner with your local institutions, local bodies, R&D institutions. And of course, the third bit is seek a way to sort of solve the energy conundrum that we have in country, which I mean, everybody knows about the big energy deficit we have. If there is no power in the schools, the students are not going to spend time doing research. It will be a case of I'm in, I need a degree, and I'm out. I'll pause there.
Okay, and it's great that you bring that up, because I have a few questions for you, which I just want you to keep in mind. So your organization is spending money, as most other organizations are, and funding research grants. The output of those research grants should be intellectual property in the form of patents or even development of products themselves that are actually in the marketplace. And yet, when we look at WIPO's, the World Intellectual Property Organization's report, Nigeria has registered maybe 100 patents in the last 20 years. And so at the rate of 2 a year or something like that, we don't seem to be seeing that metric really moving the needle in respect of that. And I'll come back to that in the general discussion. I want you to keep that in mind. And when we talk about, I mean, you mentioned some investments, a relatively high level of investment by your organization in Nigeria. Of the $2 billion budget that you're looking at pushing, how much of it is going to land in Nigeria? Is it because we lack absorptive capacity, or is it because we're just not that important in the scheme of things? And that's not a trick question. It's actually hoping that you can open up this can so that we can see what lies inside it. So let me go to Chika, because Chika actually mentioned that in Unicell, under ReCare, they actually went into intellectual property, development of intellectual property, working with academic institutions. Chika, could you give us some insight into that? You started that story, and I'm curious. Would you say that promoting intellectual property rights, actually investing in developing intellectual property and promoting it actively, has been a reasonably successful and profitable journey for your organization?
For us, it clearly has been. Not only has it allowed us to create new products, it's also allowed us to defend our market. And also when, from time to time, you do have private equity people coming to speak to you and trying to buy your business. One of the key things you're also looking at is what do you have? What are you developing? What have you developed? What are the things that will help you create competitive advantage in that marketplace? So IP is very important. IP helps a business to create barriers, of entry. But I would also just like to use this opportunity to talk about some of the challenges we've actually had trying to create partnerships. Like I said, we went to one research institute owned by the federal government. I wouldn't want to call their name. And, what we found out that we just repeatedly kept trying to do some things with them. We first started trying to send samples to them, to help us test and analyze. It was either their equipments were breaking down or they were not coming back to us. And, we first were speaking to them via phone, were sending emails, they were on Yahoo, it didn't look very professional. We had to send somebody to, to meet with them. The lady was on vacation. They didn't know when she was going to come back. By the time she came back, she just wasn't coming back to us. So this could have been a partnership that could have helped the industry, meaning us, and could have also helped the government. You never know what you can find out. Maybe you're either solving economic business problems, or you're also solving problems that are social. Like Nera said, you start with one thing, you may accidentally just discover something else that may not necessarily be relevant to you, but could be more relevant to the larger society. So I would like to talk more as we progress, so I'll just leave it there.
Okay, and I'm going to come back to that, because if it has been profitable, then one could reasonably expect that many organizations will be investing more and more in terms of developing intellectual property. And I would like you to speak later on as well, to talk a bit more about what Nigeria is doing to protect intellectual property. Is this an environment that actually successfully protects intellectual property? Because you protect what's valuable to you. And by protecting intellectual property, you encourage others to invest in that space. So please hold the thoughts, and we'll speak to Kunle, who's in the FMCG space and in the pharmaceutical space. And what they do is direct to consumer, I believe. So what has been your experience, Kunle, in terms of this R&D journey?
Thank you very much, Nere. And I think Ed, Nere, and Chika made very, very good points. If I step back a bit to reflect on our footprint of research and development over the last 50 plus years that we've been in Nigeria, we've got a clear footprint in collaborating different partnerships and supporting R&D across healthcare and even FMCG. So we supported research and development in vaccines, giving significant grants for researchers and trialists in medicine across the country. And even within the FMCG space, we've had some direct R&D in nutritional health drinks and even in oral healthcare. So we do have a clear footprint of support for R&D locally in Nigeria, even though we're a global company. One of our intent really is for us to continually bring global best practices to the local scene. That's one of the things we do basically. I want to go back to your question on the drivers of R&D, and probably if we were to split what we speak about in terms of drivers and enablers. And I know Nere spoke very well about the problem, about the market, and about the opportunity. If I'm to articulate that, I probably would put together that the first thing really is to define priorities. What priorities have we defined in terms of accelerating R&D within the country? That's the first bit. And I want to merge that with a point that Ed made in terms of R&D requiring energy. He spoke very well about mental energy, about power and all that. And I want to add a bit to that R&D also requires synergy, not just energy, but also requires synergy. And there's a clear pattern of what is happening, which I would like us to probably I'll just expand on a bit before I go further. We know that we are, all of us currently, we're still somewhat under the shadow of COVID-19. Thankfully, due to the probably excellent work that the National Task Force is doing on COVID, the impact in Nigeria, at least on lives, is not as high as in some other countries. Unfortunately, quite a number of people have died, and in reality also it's disrupted livelihoods significantly in Nigeria. But one of the things I want to highlight is that if you look at those priorities as defined and the synergies that have happened, that is in reality what has enabled the world as it were to be able to give to a degree, have some sense of optimism, that there's a degree of light at the end of the tunnel. I'm sure we remember that in the last 1 week actually, out of over the 50 candidate vaccines in development, in research and development, we've gotten very good results globally for about 3 of them, different results from different companies. And one of the things I want to highlight is that all those 3, the results, the 3 we've gotten, are actually a result of the clear priorities that were defined earlier on and synergy. What am I talking about? We are aware that globally there was a laser focus on getting the vaccine out as quickly as possible. Typically, from experience in the healthcare industry, you will require minimum from history about 10 years from research and development to actually having a vaccine ready for approval. Now you have that in 10 months, and that speed is unprecedented. What has enabled that speed really is the synergy, is the partnerships, is the clear definition of priorities from government, the partnership between academia, partnership between startups, and between established companies and organized private sector like ourselves. And it's a clear pattern that has proven to be successful from very recent results that has proven capable of being able to actually significantly shift the perspective and the paradigm in terms of research and in terms of development. And really, if we break down the individual components of that, as the priority was clearly defined in terms of government actually providing incentives, providing some funding, providing a market for government that guarantee that when we come up with this vaccine, there will be a market for it. That's clearly an incentive. So a lot of funding was actually also provided by the government for many of these researchers, because in reality they put a lot of capital at risk. Most products that go into research and development actually fail, but the government put some capital at risk. Individuals and organizations, private organizations will also put some capital at risk, and that has enabled this. And of course, because a number of universities, a number of startups have done some basic research in the past, it was a lot easier to pick up from where they stopped. And in reality, that's what has enabled the progress that we've made. That template can be applied to so many things, looking at the driver and the enabler. I think as we go on, I'll probably expand a bit on this.
Fantastic, and I think from the conversation, a lot of things are coming up that we need to kind of like we need to bring together into what will represent a roadmap for Nigeria, because it's really about nation building. It's really about building Nigeria's capacity and Nigeria's positioning within the global economies, and anchoring that on research and development. So a few things have come out that are very clear, and I like one point that you made. You brought in the role of government. You also brought in the role of government-funded research. And the globals, whereas the globals may not necessarily have the same, we wouldn't imagine that the globals have the same challenge of funding as a local organization would. I would imagine that a UNICEF, for instance, investing in research to develop products that are meant for Black people, that would have meet particular challenges within a local market, would be compared, for instance, to somebody developing a product that is like you just mentioned, like something as like COVID-19. So a few things that come to mind around that I want us to kind of like all of us to come and kind of like weigh in on. One that is most important perhaps is this. We have spoken about education. All of you have mentioned at some point human capital and being able to have the right kind of human capital to put in the energy into the research. You've also spoken about the institutions of research. I mentioned the universities, for example, as well as federal research agencies as potential partners in that process. You've mentioned funding. You've also talked about infrastructure issues like power, and we've also spoken about incentives. And also, very important, I think Chika mentioned the issue of culture. Culture being, the ability to stay with something for a period of time and commit yourself to having outputs. And just before we go into that, I want to drop two anecdotes with you. One is a very personal situation, and that's about sickle cell, right? So 20 years ago, I went to University of what was then Unife, and is now Obafemi Awolowo University Ife, and visited the pharmacological department. And I went there for a specific purpose. We're looking for a cure to sickle cell anemia. And there was a professor, a doctor who was doing research, and he was working with a native doctor. And they were producing this cure that actually, and I can testify to that, actually broke the sickle cell crisis. Not once, not twice, but it was really odd. He would go into the bush in the early hours of the morning, and he would come back with what he has. And inside the lab, they would synthesize it into a crystalline kind of thing, powder. And that powder, his instructions were put it in warm akamu, right, in a calabash. And he provided a chicken bone that you used to stir it. I mean, all those elements look like fetish. But when you take it down to a scientific basis, you realize that he was determining the conditions under which the drug will be most efficacious. He was also providing you with the means to ingest it through a straw, which was a chicken bone. But that science has not turned into a patent and has not translated into a product and has not solved the problem of sickle cell anemia in this country. What is it that would bring this, just like you mentioned COVID-19, what are the things that would bring together, what are the elements that need to be brought together to enable this country focus on building capacity to solve a single problem like COVID-19 has been solved by people who are researching outside? What are your thoughts on that? Because with the problems are there, we do have to some extent the human capital. So what is it that will make this mix really work? The question is open to all of you, and yeah, go ahead, Kunle.
If I may go first, it's a very interesting example that you gave. And incidentally, it appears we have the same alma mater. Ife is also one of the institutions I attended, actually. So that's also interesting.
I'm a great lion. I'm a great lion, which is greater than great UI. But I'll allow that pass.
All right. So one of the things I want to point out is that regarding sickle cell specifically, I do know that we have one of the companies that are based in the country that actually are taking some of the products of some of the phytomed, some of the herbal medicine from the institutions, and they turn that into medication for sickle cell. How commercially successful that has been, I'm not really aware of course it's not. So I do know that nexus exists between taking products, to your example, from the institutions, from the results of research, patents being obtained, and translating that into a medicine to solve a particular problem. What also would help really, for instance, if there were more opportunities for something similar. But that channel already exists, and I'm aware that there's a medicine that actually, to your point, to your example, for sickle cell disease that's been developed locally.
Yeah, the research has been there for over 40 years. The Fagara plant has been around. In fact, they use it as a chewing stick in some parts of Nigeria, called Viata in some parts of Nigeria. It's called the Fagara plant. And so this work has already been done. The question is, it's emerged out of research and developments that didn't sit within the scientific space. It emerged out of work that was done by native doctors. And of course, you run away from native doctors, but that was their science. What is preventing us from taking that type of science? And we can even go back to the maybe as far back as the 13 or 1400s. There's a little town somewhere outside Enugu that's called Leja. They had iron smelting as far back as the 1400s, the 1200s. And nothing has happened to that. So we keep coming back to this question. It's less so much that there are opportunities and that the challenges are there, as to that magic. What is that switch that enables us to go from conceptualizing an idea or a solution to a problem and moving that into a scientific process through research and development that results in a product or a service? That's really where the pivot is. And I'm really curious because Chika addressed that in a way, in his own way, and built something. But he says, I think, and Chika, if I may quickly swing over to you, do you think that the challenge is with the absence of strong educational or research institutions? Or is it with the government's commitment or lack of government's commitments to supporting R&D? Or is it the private sector, or is it just our culture? Because we're aggressively entrepreneurial people. We would imagine that if there was a solution to a global problem like sickle cell or anything, or like COVID-19, that Nigerians would jump all over it and make hay. What's going on?
I think it's not just one factor. There are several factors. One of them is education. So we need to create this culture, and so that we output more from research and development. If you look at education, we need to start quite early to expose kids from primary school, from secondary school to university to projects. As an industrial chemist, I didn't do projects until my final year. And when I was in school, I wasn't really interested in the chemistry, but it was that project that was a turning point, because I could see how you could commercialize chemistry, how you could use chemistry to solve the problems of the world. That is one. The other one is information. Where do you have access to, how do you have access to information? For example, this story you're telling us. I had a sister who was a sickler who died. If I only knew that place, I would have really gone to Ife a couple of times to try and save her life. So information is key. The other thing, yes, we'll blame the government, but the truth is that, the government is not making money. So let's look at businesses. In Nigeria, I think businesses are struggling with mobilizing capital. If Nigerian businesses can understand how to mobilize capital, then it becomes easier. How are you going to do it? Are you going to bring in?
Let me jump in there. Given the size of government and the potency of government, isn't it a realistic expectation? And I think Ed had mentioned this, that government should be an active funder of research. And there talked about patient capital. Patient capital is not something that you go to a bank for. Isn't there a key role for government to actively fund? Because currently the data says that we are either 2% or 0.2% of our GDP goes into research and development. At 0.2%, that is clearly not a priority. Isn't there an active role for government, or you feel the private sector should be able to do that on its own?
If you do look at it, actually, I probably will be less than that 0.2%. But the truth is, what quality of people do you have in government? Do they understand this imperative? Do they know what you're talking about? So is it not possible to for the private sector to lead the way, and maybe the government would learn and take it up from there? I'm not saying that government will shirk their responsibility, but unfortunately, since independence, just look at it. You do not see a government that has a roadmap. We haven't seen any, not since I started growing up. I don't see, when I engage them, I don't see people who have an understanding what the key issues are and how they are going to solve those problems. So if we start talking about quality of people in there, I think we'll deviate from what the main issues or topics, are. But for businesses, if we find a better way to mobilize capital, is it that patient's capital that Nere is talking about that would invest in R&D? But you need size, which is what the global companies do have, the multinational companies do have. You have some companies who invest up to 10% of their total revenue into R&D because their business is being driven by innovation. You have some other ones who will do between 2 and 5%. But what is important is that they are investing a lot of money into this. So if Nigerian businesses had a way of mobilizing their capital, either by taking on more investors or getting listed on the Nigerian Stock Exchange, then you can have a bit more money that you can play around with in R&D, because some of the investing in R&D, some of the outcomes may take, a bit of a time for you to see the impact. Some you can also see the low-hanging fruits. Like I said earlier, if you just get into shops, you will see opportunities for Nigeria to manufacture more. Those are not rocket science. I mean, those are your low-hanging fruits that you can just get in. You find that people who supply you raw materials will also give you formulations. So they've already done part of that work for you. You do not need to do more. But I think businesses will have a role to play. We need to invest more in R&D, even not minding the frustrations of the, that I just outlined, of going into research, meeting research institutes, or going into universities to try and partner with them. We need to get out there and engage them more. Why? Because the outcome of the research could help our competitiveness, could help us stay in business. Then it will also help us solve social problems.
Fantastic. And I like the last point that you made about competitiveness, because Nigeria ranks 117 out of 137 on the latest Global Innovation Index that was published by WIPO. And in terms of our Global Competitiveness Index, we are, I think, 127 out of 137 countries globally. So clearly there's a problem. If you look at the scatter diagrams that are provided for both of those indices, you would find that the critical areas where we seem to be lagging behind in terms of our peers is exactly in the spaces of knowledge, higher education, research and development. And all these things go into the ability for us to build innovation as a national capability. I like the point you made about funding. And the question that I'd like to throw to the group is really, is funding an issue that should be a government-driven event, or should it be a private sector-led event? Would we do better with private sector as fund managers of government funds that are put into R&D, and therefore have more efficiency and more accountability around the allocation of those kind of funds? And then, given the current status of Nigeria's finances, the fact that we're in a recession and government is actually struggling to find funding, is it still realistic to look to government for funding? Or is this something that we can perhaps build a partnership across the globals and the locals and focus our investment in specific areas? Ed talked about a $2 billion fund for in R&D. I'm sure GSK has something similar. I wouldn't put such a burden on Unicel or Kian, but clearly, do you, as the global, see a means for us to work towards creating private sector funding, or assembling some kind of a vehicle that allows us to access global funding for R&D that is local to Nigeria?
Can I come in, please?
Yes, please, go ahead.
Yes. In terms of this, government will need to provide leadership through policies first if they don't have the money. They need to find a way to encourage private sector. In other climes, you see governments use tax credits. We do have a partner in the UK. During this COVID, their year ended in June 30, 2020. I mean, one of the things that helped them was their tax credit, because otherwise they were really not generating any sales. But the year before, they had made significant investment in building a new laboratory, hiring more research, most research chemists. Why did they do that? Because they knew that they were going to get tax credits from government. That is one. The other thing is that if government provides a roadmap, it will provide clear policies, then we would have, the private sector will have a way to engage with the research institutes, would have a way to engage with the universities or tertiary institutions, to find a way to invest more in research and development. Yet, if we can put together a fund.
Yes. So Chika, let me jump in there, because I think, and I believe that I want to hear from GSK and from Shell in respect to what you just said, because government does have a roadmap apparently for technology and for technology adoption. It does have the institutes. It has the federal universities, well, when they are open. And so it seems like the infrastructure, the basic framework may be in place, and yet it's not happening. But this year, in the midst of the pandemic, a private university was able to access a $40 million loan from the Africa Development Bank for investments in research facilities, in research and production, research facilities in the medical institute. That's the Afe Babalola University. So if that is possible, $40 million for a private university, why is it not happening elsewhere? Shell is investing in institutions as well. So what has been your experience? Is it that the investments cannot go to public organizations and public institutions, and you're willing to invest in private sector institutions, or is there a way that we can create a different type of partnership that works? Aggregate the funds and create the facilities, just like Chika has mentioned, where you can actually get tax credits. And by the way, there is a tax, R&D is deductible before your tax in Nigeria, in our current laws. I don't know to what extent companies are taking advantage of that, and maybe you can give us some insights in that respect. Have you benefited from the current structure of our science and technology policy and our tax structures and things like that?
Yeah, maybe Chineye, let me sort of step a little bit back and then talk about R&D in the context of R&D, not for the sake of R&D. So, and it's always around what is the priority of the organization? What R&D are you focused on? And do those two priorities meet each other? Like I mentioned earlier, Shell is committed to spend $2 billion over the next years to sort of see how we can develop cleaner energy solutions that will allow us to provide energy for over 100 million people in developing countries. Nigeria is the example of a developing country. In Nigeria, I mean, for instance, we have an organization called Olon, who funds investments in the R&D space that can provide that energy. We have partnered with Oxano, possibly the largest solar assembling plant in country, to see how we can move away from reducing the import philosophy to begin to assemble large scale and even begin to manufacture so that we can close that cleaner energy gap. And I think it's that sort of synergy when you sort of heard Kunle talk about. The energy is there, the schools are there, but as private organizations, we will always have a priority at a particular point, and then we're then seeking the R&D space. Are we aligned? And of course, if that alignment exists, that is how you begin to see the funds begin to move in that particular area. And I think we should sort of not forget that sort of base energy requirement that I sort of spoke about. Nere spoke about it being long-term. So basically, you're not going to pick a quality R&D personnel the day you need it. You're going to have created the right framework at the educational level to sort of get people through the sort of R&D thinking. And that's why we also take that view that it's around supporting the higher institutions. It's around providing educational grants. It's around providing scholarships that we are able to build that mental base that companies, apart from Shell, can lean on to sort of build the sort of R&D framework that they need to succeed. Of course, the next step then is around you're doing R&D, but you need to get your R&D into the commercial space. I mean, you spoke about your sort of drug and that sort of existed at the local level. China, yeah, I mean, a lot of things in this sector is around packaging, right? So, so you would need at some point to be able to sort of sit back and say, oh, this is working. I have this product. How do I package it such that a Shell looking at it can sort of see? We can see how you've gone through your testing process. We can see how you have done what you have done, because that is exactly what protects us from a regulatory perspective. And I think that, and of course, you can see there where education becomes important, because if you're not educated to a certain level, you're not able to provide that framework that allows an organization to take a risk on your product. You don't have the history of tests you have done. You have not registered this product. So it's not as straightforward as having the idea. It's having the idea, packaging it, going through the sort of regulatory frameworks that makes that acceptable for organizations that work in more than one climate or beyond Nigeria. And that is actually an area where government's role is important, right?
Okay.
We don't set the laws that sort of guide that process, but where government may not have the funds for whatever reason, but if that regulation and ease of doing business is there to support this sort of investments, provide this sort of framework that is clear that this has met the requirements established by the government, it makes it a lot easier for the private sector to step in.
Let me,
exactly. So go ahead, Kunle.
If I could build on what Ed mentioned, he mentioned the issue of strategic partnership. And for us, for instance, it's something that we're very focused on, working with the right partners in the country. Recently, we gave a grant of £7.5 million to an organization here towards the control and mitigation of childhood pneumonia. And of course, data gathering is an important component of that grant. This is in addition to many grants we've given to many researchers within the country. There are clear rules for the private sector, there are clear rules for government, clear rules for regulators, and also clear rules for academia. And I must say that with regards to government, there's obviously clear recognition of what needs to be done. And there's some recent happenings or development that could give room for optimism. For instance, we may be aware that recently the Central Bank of Nigeria recently instituted a healthcare sector research and development international fund, where researchers with group proposals in the healthcare space can get up to about $500 million for grants, or $50 million for research, depending on what they're doing. I'm also aware that government, another government agency, TED Fund, also has advanced some discussions regarding the foundation that they want to institute towards developing research and development in Nigeria. Probably that speaks a bit to the triple helix model for us to actually accelerate research and development within our country. There's a clear role for government, and within our government agency, there's a clear role for regulators. And like I mentioned, there is a lot of cause for optimism, especially in the healthcare sector, from some of the recent developments, especially the grants and the funding, the intervention fund available from CBN to researchers across the country. For us as private sector, we will continue to contribute our quota. We will continue to bring in global best practices. We're already doing significant technology transfer with one of the local manufacturers in the country that we intend to enter into a strategic partnership with. And we know that as this goes on, it opens up new vistas for further collaboration, for further bringing of global best practices, which differentiates an organization like ours.
So I'm hearing, and those are great points that you're making, and anyone listening to our conversation may go away with the impression that there is a lot of research that's going on in Nigeria, a lot of research and development that's going on in Nigeria, and a lot of funding attached to it. And I'm not certain that that is really the general opinion. The conventional wisdom probably says no. The data also points to that. I mean, the $500 million fund was only launched this year, and it was launched by an organization that's in charge of local content. As part of the preparation for this, I did go and look at their 10-year or 11-year anniversary document. And I combed through that entire document looking for one single innovation, one single patent, one single output of R&D that was critically funded by the government or funded by the proceeds coming from that oil and gas sector. And there was none, not one statement in over 20-something pages of a document celebrating 10 years of activity. Today, they launched a $500 million fund, which means that maybe they've just woken up, and that would be fantastic. We can look at basic things. I mean, I don't want to trivialize the matter, but we do know that the yam pounder was invented in Nigeria. But it was not, I think it was the University of Ibadan or Proda in Enugu or something that developed the first yam pounder. It goes to the heart of Nigerians. It's a product that should be in the consumer market, and it has come in. But for it to come in, that patent, that technology had to travel to Japan. And it came back as Panasonic yam pounders, and we continue to buy those yam pounders today. There's no capacity to develop or to build such things in this country. And the reason why I bring that up is that it's very important for us to be able to measure not just the quality, the quantity of the research that's going on by funding, right? Or by the breadth of the research, but also the quality And lastly, its ability, how that research is eventually transferred into the development of products and services. And I see a huge gap that is there. And I'm not sure, because when Nair was speaking, she was talking about the work that they did, ideating before going into actual production. Now I wonder what benefit has come to her organization or to organizations like hers for this investment in R&D. Were they building on what existed before? Are they, for instance, getting any incentive for having created that R&D? Someone mentioned during the call that R&D should not be CSR. It's got to be intentional and tied to a specific outcome. And usually a commercial outcome is the best reason for investing in R&D. So again, the question comes, the framework exists, the institutions seem to be there. There may be some dirt in terms of human capital. There may be some challenges in the policies. But the question is, in 60 years, should we be where we are today in terms of the quantum and the vector of research and development? And how do we drastically change that?
Can I say something?
Please do.
Can I?
Yes, please go ahead.
When Mr. Chika said something about policy, I want to talk a bit about my experience to merge a few things that we're talking about, including government. With this fourth industrial revolution, right now, warfare and how things happen with competitiveness, everything has gone science and tech. And it's really, every nation is powered by their research. The way I remember going to school with a lot of nationals from China, Malaysia, India, and a lot of what is going on is these people, they go back and they're building their nation. And it's the R&D. I want to differ a bit about Nigeria. Most Nigerians I meet are highly educated. I think even with the deficit of, even with the educational deficit we have, based on the quality, I mean, we leave Nigeria and we thrive elsewhere. So the issue is not the education. I think the issue is the environment and the mindset. And what concerns me about this is that, like it or not, when we're talking back to the power of an economy or the government, I understand the government's fear. So I'll give you, before I say, I'm saying all this to now tell you my story, back to the policy. For example, we're doing something that's highly sensitive, which is gold. We're dealing with gold. It affects the economy. It affects many things. Unfortunately, the government doesn't have the data. They didn't do the research. We've done it. Now, like it or not, there's a tension the government is going to have because their government, they would like to be in control of some things. And it's economic warfare. They want to be, they may be afraid. Could we now have private sector potentially sabotaging the country? But the issue is they didn't do the data. They didn't bring the data. They didn't do the research. They didn't invest in it. When I worked as a computer engineer, Somerset Lab, it was a government collaboration with IBM. That's the way it started. In America and Israel, as small as they are, big innovation. Government, even if they don't have money, should find ways to partner with technical institutions or companies because they need to find way to have some stake. And I think that's part of what's happening with our country. I get it, the government may not have the funding, but I understand the tension. When you begin having some technical outputs that they don't have any stake in, there's going to be that fear. So you now have this case where private sector is even afraid to do some really cutting edge things because there's no policy around it. And there's the fear that after you've created this thing, you can't really go to market. Also coming back to what you were saying about the sickle cell and natural medicine, back to culture. You have highly skilled Nigerians. The government is not going to credit what you're doing. They rather look to the West and what the West says to give it credit. So at the end of the day, the best minds are here, inventing things, innovate, finding, like I'll tell you with data for gold. All the data we've produced for gold in Nigeria and West Africa, even the World Gold Council didn't have that data. But I had enough confidence. I could sit with the World Gold Council and tell them, you're wrong. You don't have this data. And eventually, they backed down and admitted, honestly, we never considered Africa even as a potential gold market economy. We didn't look at the data, but you're making compelling. People say, why are you doing? So the thing is, you have people not wondering why you're doing what you're doing, but the data is there. Now, I'm confident with the data I have and my education to challenge any institution. on what I'm doing. And at the end, they back down. But my country, my government that doesn't have the data, and instead they look out to say, well, what is the UN and the World Food Council saying? But they don't have the data. So like it or not, we can't get around this. We need our government to be involved in research and development. It's part of, like, because if they don't support it, they're going to sabotage it. There'll be this fear that there's something that they don't control. So sorry to go off course, but I think that policy and government synergy, we can't get around from it, because if there's no policy around it, no one's going to keep investing in what they are not sure the government is going to do about their discovery.
And that's why we're here. You make a great point. Unfortunately, we don't have anyone, as somebody has pointed out in the Q&A. And please do put your questions to the Q&A so that we, as we round up, we make sure we cover your concerns, the concerns coming from the public. As somebody has pointed out, we don't have a member of a public institution here that's involved in R&D as part of our panel, but we do have the relationship. So to the point that you're making there is important in terms of answering that question, that there needs to be, if there is a gap between government and the private sector, it needs to be closed. If there is to be some kind of acceleration, we need to work harder on trying to close that gap between the private and the private sector and the public sector in terms of policy, in terms of investment. And it calls to mind another question that has come up here. And this question was directed at Mr. Oyelano, who is an alumni of University of Ife, and he asked specifically, does your school have an endowment fund? And if yes, how effective is that fund towards R&D? Sorry, they put you on the spot, not me. So over to you. Because I think endowment funds are mechanisms for investment.
I think it's a great question that has been asked by the member of the audience. And in various ways, we support educational institutions in Nigeria. We support Nigerians also to even have, like I mentioned, access to the best practices. So currently, for instance, there's a grant available for scholarships for people across Africa and Nigeria to attend a program, master's program in the London School of Medicine and Tropical Hygiene. That's one of the things we've done. I've mentioned the £7.5 million grant that's available to an organization in Nigeria looking at pneumonia and data gathering. I think from what Mary mentioned, the absence of data is one of the key gaps we have as an enabler of research in Nigeria. We've supported studies and research and development in various universities in Nigeria, various researchers in various healthcare areas. And one of the ones we did in Abuja, for instance, one of the researchers we supported in Abuja, in Abuja, actually had a result of the study that we funded 100% published in the New England Journal of Medicine, which for people that in the academia we know that that's probably one of the most reputable journals in the world. So we've got a long history and footprint, very strong footprint of supporting research development in universities in Nigeria and also different researchers. And we're still doing that and we're still committed to that.
But let me jump in and ask the question, right? So let's separate your alumnus of a certain university and just say, would you describe any university in Nigeria? Could you call out one or two research universities in Nigeria that you are aware of that have distinguished themselves as centers of research in one area or the other? Are you aware of any? And this question goes to the panel because you mentioned the triple helix, and the triple helix pivots around the cluster that is developed inside the academia and is funded by industry in order to convert their research into use. So are there any research universities in Nigeria? And if not, why not?
I think one of the models that what we should look at is for efficiency and effectiveness. It's worked well in medicine, for instance. If certain universities in Nigeria could kind of develop themselves to become centers of excellence in various areas of research, if Ife that we've mentioned, for instance, and it's already reputed to be a center of excellence for traditional medicine, I think Ife has done pretty well in that regard. To your point, I know many researchers, professors that work with the so-called herbalists to actually try to identify some of these local plants that have been in use for ages, and they can standardize them, validate the use, and probably have some kind of trial regarding them. So I do know that that has some pretty good outcomes have come out of there in terms of results that have been published. I know that other universities also are looking in that regard. So for instance, we know that UNN at some point, for instance, in an area of medicine was very well known for issues related to cardiology. So that's some of the areas we can look at, and we know that. But a center of excellence model will probably help the acceleration, so that we know that if we're speaking in Nigeria on, say, for instance, electronics or robotics or Internet of Things or AI, this is a particular institution that is a center of excellence for that.
So you make a great point, and I think the arguments are going towards some arguments are going towards the fact that our universities tend to do general studies, to generalize as opposed to specialize, and that there's a need to specialize in some area. Chika went to University of Nigeria, Nsukka, and he studied industrial chemistry there, and he said his interest was sparked from there. So the question then will be, were you to go back to Chika, if you went back to University of Nigeria, Nsukka, would you recognize it for what it was at the time when you were an industrial chemist there and it sparked your interest? And have you been back? Is there an endowment fund in UNN, for instance, for research into industrial chemistry?
Not long after I left, I heard that the very beautiful big gigantic laboratory that was built had been burnt down. I don't know why, what happened. So obviously they would have, university students who came after us would have lost that opportunity to have been in this wonderful laboratory, this wonderful building. So when you go back, what you had is not the same as what you see. But at the moment, we're also working with them to try and develop something, to try and create some partnership and try and put in some money. I'm beginning to have some conversations with them to see what we can do, not just University of Nigeria, but other universities as well.
Okay, fantastic. So we've, as usual, with this kind of fascinating discussions, there's never enough time. As we start to round up, I would like for you to, each of you to perhaps give your closing remarks or closing comments in a minute, and focus it on the critical question of identifying what you think are the immediate next steps for reactivating and accelerating the pace of investment in R&D activity in Nigeria. Who wants to go first? It's a problem, it's a challenge, but we definitely have to come forward with solutions, and that's what NESG is all about. So who wants to go first? A minute?
If I could,
Okay, please go ahead, Kule.
All right, so I think, like we mentioned earlier, the topic itself, building partnerships for residents, is pretty important. And I think that's absolutely the right way to go. If we look across the entire value chain for R&D, you will find that all actors are seen to where government, academia, private sector have very clear rules. What we could, and of course, I speak for my organization. We're pretty committed to continue to support Nigeria. We've been here for many years, and we continue to be here supporting in various ways research and researchers and even institutions. If we define, once those priorities are clearly defined, and we can actually map what each person could and each organ, each segment, each circle could do in terms of what this is what government should do. This is what the private sector should do. This is what academia should, how AI should be structured, what it should focus on. And to the point we've identified, we look at drivers, we look at enablers, and wherever there are gaps, and of course there will be gaps, we will close them. And the example again I want to point out is the almost impossible thing that's been achieved with by my organization and other organizations with the research we're doing on COVID vaccine that has been accelerated as it's beginning to deliver results for the world. That's I think one of the things we should do. Conversation should continue with a clear structure of the role of each segment.
Thank you very much. Nair, what closing thoughts do you have?
Yeah, well, my closing thoughts are, my closing thoughts are, notwithstanding what we can't overcome that may seem huge. I think my closing thoughts about how we deal with data that's present. I find that there's a lot of data that's there, and it's more about now maybe a commitment of all of us in the private sector to see how we can access data that affects our sector, and coming together in some ways to take that data towards creating papers. Because what I found at the end of the day is, if I look around, it's hard to find papers. The only papers you see, like we say, are either coming from academia or external, and the consultants as well. But for me, like I would say, consultants are often coming to me to get data. So what I'm finding out is that we need more and more of us to put out papers, white papers, information, whatever we have, put it out there. The R&D that we have, the more it's out there, the more we can, in our own way, build the, should we say, our own data bank that we need for our own R&D, while the government comes together, like we say, low-hanging fruits, to join us to build what we want to see in R&D.
Fantastic. Mr. Wong, the billion-dollar man, what are your thoughts? We can't hear you. I think you're muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Yes, I think education is at the cradle of every successful R&D. Shell is an energy company. We have been in Nigeria for the past 50 or 60 years, somewhere in the middle. And I think for us, we view success in the sort of deep human capital that we have built in the Nigerian sector when it comes to energy. Petroleum engineers, geoscientists, and I mean, you may not see patents in the public domain, but I'm sure you anywhere in the globe, when you talk about energy professionals, you would see Nigerians sort of raise their hand in terms of the experience, in terms of the cutting edge technology that they've sort of developed, whether you're looking at the Gulf of Mexico, the UK North Sea, or even in Nigeria, looking at the deep water project carried out by SNEPCO called Bonga. And I think we've seen that being built. We've seen the success of that. We would like to sort of continue doing what we're doing in that space. Like Kunle spoke about it, it's about continuing to build centers of excellence in the universities. Today, we have a center of excellence in UNIBEN for geosciences and engineering. It is a world-class center of excellence. We have set up a center of excellence in Rivers for marine engineering. It's also another world-class institution. We have professorial chairs in about 5 universities in Nigeria. And I think we would continue to build that cradle for R&D, which is human capital. What we've also then decided to do is saying when the human capital comes up with R&D solutions that meet our selfish interests as an energy company, we will support it. We will for, because we are in this to make money, right? And I think it is, and that's what we would do. We would continue to fund R&D that have a priority that solves our energy solution, because we want cleaner energy solutions. We want to provide energy for over 100 million people in developing countries. And if the solutions present like themselves, like I spoke about the work we're doing, trying to build new mini grids and create a solar assembly plant, of course we will support it. What we would also then continue to look for government is to provide the policy and the right regulatory framework that will allow those private partnerships to thrive.
Thank you very much. Chika, closing thoughts?
Yeah, it's just a quick one. The government needs to get the IP rights system right. You know, how do you do the registration? How fast? If you take something as simple as trademark, you know, to get a trademark registered in Nigeria takes almost forever. Doing it in the UK, it just takes you a few weeks. Doing it in the US, once you satisfy all the requirements, you know, you get your trademark registered. You know, you talk about patents as well. If you don't have ease of registration, then it becomes difficult for people to invest in this. I mean, you create a market. How do you create a market? You create a demand. If there's a demand, because IP is money today and tomorrow. So if there is ease, then people are going to be more motivated to invest their time and resources in research and development, in innovation. Also, finally, you know, I would like to divide this into 3 phases. One, the long term, which is big, you know, big picture, big investment, the medium term, and the near term, which will just require, what do you want to do immediately? Now, I'm speaking to small scale industries. Look, it's important for you to invest time and resources, no matter how little, into R&D, because that is what would help your survival tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you very much. A superb panel, and we're 5 minutes over time, so I'll keep the closing. I'll try to kind of like wrap it up, what I've heard from all of you, and please don't go away just yet. So I think some important things. So a total tertiary education sector in Nigeria has a population of about 2 million, including research institutions. The academic staff or the faculty, including research faculty, is no more than 100,000 across the country. The system outputs about 500,000 students every year from all the universities in this country today. We are currently at about 1% of our population in tertiary education, as opposed to the 8% that we need to pivot growth. Therefore, there is a massive need, not just to expand the capacity of the education system, but also to deepen the quality of that through investments, through a collaboration using the triple helix framework to bring private sector and government closer to the academia and industry itself, to take the outputs from that and to help to develop take the outputs of research into products that can actually be commercialized, because the private sector operates on a profit motive. CSR is inadequate to fund the development of serious R&D, and government needs to establish its priorities. By setting a priority, we need moonshots that would say to us that, there are 4 or 5 things that we want to be able to establish, 4 or 5 things we want to be able to excel in, and we need to be able to concentrate all our efforts as partners to deliver those 4 or 5 things. A couple of moonshots. Something to say, for instance, Nigeria will solve sickle cell within the next 10 years, or Nigeria will address the issue of pneumonia in children in the next 10 years. We've done this for polio. We've been able to provide the kind of collaboration that happens across private and public sector to address things that have resulted in significant change in our environment. Nigeria beat Ebola. We've managed COVID relatively well. And I think that with that type of synergy and the continued collaboration that happens around partnerships, we can address research and development. Critical to R&D and R&D investment is funding. The funding will come from the globals. It will come from private companies like Unicell. It will come from global funding institutions, provided there is accountability and focus around how those funds are being used. The current investments in facilities perhaps may be underutilized. The outputs that we're seeing are great, but they have yet to translate into what can become a driver for continuous reinvestment in the sector. We've understood that R&D is not a short-term thing. It takes decades before you can actually get your results. But as a national commitment to driving this, there must be some way in which we can, first of all, get all these people to the table, put us together, focus us on specific priorities, and do the investment that's required to be able to get these things out. I thank the panel for an incredibly enlightening session, lots of insights, lots of experience, and we can see that in the typical Nigerian way, we know the board last. We have decided that we are going to do it, and the entrepreneurial spirit has kicked in. What we now need to do is to energize that entrepreneurial spirit, focus on clusters, such as the universities, concentrate on putting infrastructure in place in those kind of locations, put the research facilities in place, and invite people and focus them on specific outcomes, and I think we'll get the results. It's never too late. It's a great start, and this discussion should go on and take us into the next phase, which is a closer collaboration, a more concentrated, objective, and outcome-driven type of conversation in collaboration with the partners, local and global. Thank you very much for a really, really exciting session and for all the insights that you've given. I look forward to seeing specific outcomes from this in terms of PPPs, and eventually Nigeria will be on the globe for something like the COVID vaccine, as other countries have done. So let me thank everyone for your time. Thank you, audience, for your time. Thank the panelists for a super session. My apologies that the time was not longer, but I hope we got something out of the session. And if you give me 1 second, we'll quickly take a photograph so that we can hold you accountable for everything that you said you're going to do from today going forward. Thank you very much. If you can bring us all on screen, we can, okay. Big smile, everyone.